Good afternoon. On November 30th of 2021, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Lieutenant Tim Willis doesn't remember exactly what happened immediately upon being informed that there's a possible shooter at the Oxford High School. Doesn't really remember who he called or how he got down in the elevator, but he remembers one thing. Whoever he called, the first thing the caller said was, "It's real." Doesn't really remember the details on how he got there that day. But he did tell you that of all the first responder scenes he's ever experienced in his 20 plus years of being in law enforcement, this was the largest and most serious by far, and the second, what didn't even come close. Ed Wagrowski, who is now works for the Secret Service but was worked for the Sheriff's Office in the Computer Crimes Department, told you that he went so fast that he could barely keep his tires on the road. He told you that he will never forget the look on those kids' faces because they looked like zombies. He also told you that in that moment of crisis, he will never forget the looks on the parents' faces who were waiting desperately for their kid to get off those buses. Molly Darnell, a seasoned teacher who had years and years of training on what to do in an active shooter situation, she told you that even though she locked eyes with James Crumbley's son when he fired his SIG 9mm at her and hit her, she still couldn't believe she was shot. She told you that she didn't even put it together when she felt the warmth and burning on her arm. She didn't even trust herself to recognize a voice she'd known for over 20 years outside the door. And you heard from Chrissy Gibson Marshall, an assistant principal who had had hours and hours of training on what to do in an active shooting situation. And what did she do? She ran towards the shooter. She ran towards the shooter. All the training, all the preparation, and she did the opposite of what she was trained to do and what she tells everybody else to do. Because she couldn't believe it. And even when she saw James Crumbley's son with that gun, she still couldn't believe it. But she wasn't going to leave because Tate needed her help. All four of these individuals trained for years and years and years. Law enforcement, what to do in an active shooting situation. Yet, all four of them, as experienced and trained as they were, had no idea how to accept the reality that this was happening. Which is why Lieutenant Willis remembers it's real. Ladies and gentlemen, those four people, they were adults. Those four trained, experienced people were adults. These four were children. And so were the hundreds of kids in that school. What happened that day is about the deaths of these four children and what James Crumbley did and what he didn't do. The shooter has been sentenced and prosecuted and convicted. He pulled the trigger. James Crumbley is not on trial for what his son did. James Crumbley is on trial for what he did and what he didn't do. James Crumbley had a willful disregard of a known danger and it caused the death of 4 students in Oxford High School on November 30th, 2021. Hannah, Madison, Tate, and Justin. I'm going to spend a few minutes on the law, but the judge is the authority on what the law is, and she's going to instruct you what the law is. He's charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter under 2 alternative theories. You don't have to find both. You don't have to agree on both. You can agree on both, but either one is the only thing necessary to return a verdict of guilty. The first is that there was gross negligence in the performance of a lawful act, and that the defendant caused death, and in doing the act that caused death, he acted in gross negligence. And then the second is his failure to perform a legal duty, and that he knew about the facts that gave rise to the duty, and he willfully neglected or refused to perform that duty, and he failed to perform it, and it grossly negligent to human life. And that the death of the victims were directly caused by defendant's failure to perform this duty. 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for children who were killed. There can be more than one cause of death. James Crumbley doesn't get a pass because somebody else also caused the death of these 4 kids. And the judge will instruct you on that. It's not enough that he just made it possible for the deaths of Madison, Tate, Hannah, and Justin. You must find beyond a reasonable doubt that the deaths were the natural or necessary result of his acts or failure to act. You heard the evidence about how each of those kids were killed. And as previously noted, there can be more than one cause of death. In order to find that the death of Madison, Tate, Hannah, and Justin was caused by the defendant, you must also find beyond a reasonable doubt that his son's act of shooting someone was reasonably foreseeable. Not that he knew his son was going to kill 4 people. That is not what I have to prove. Just that it was reasonably foreseeable. What's gross negligence? It's more than carelessness. It's willfully disregarding the results to others that might follow from an act or failure to act. And in order to find that, you have to find the defendant was grossly negligent, and you must find each of the following three things beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that he knew of the danger to another. That is, he knew there was a situation that required him to take ordinary care to avoid injuring someone else. Second, that he could have avoided injuring another by using ordinary care. And third, that the defendant failed to use ordinary care to prevent injuring another one to a reasonable person. A reasonable person. And it must be apparent that the result was likely to be serious injury. In Michigan, a parent has a legal duty to exercise reasonable care to prevent the minor child from intentionally harming others or prevent the minor child from conducting themselves in a way that creates unreasonable risk of harm to others if the parent knows that they have the ability to control their minor child and knows of the necessity and opportunity for exercising such control. Even before we had safe storage, there was always a legal duty that existed. That newly passed law has no bearing on your legal duty that, as a parent, that you've always had. I said this before, there are 2 theories, 2 different ways to prove the same crime. If proven, one of these, both of them, are sufficient to establish the crime of involuntary manslaughter. And again, it's not necessary that you all agree on which theory has been proven, as long as you agree that the prosecutors proved at least one of those theories beyond a reasonable doubt.